welcome to the California Avenue podcast. I'm your host, Unconventionally Black, UB for short, and this is a Black-centered space and place where all are welcome and where we discuss unconventional topics unapologetically from lived experiences and perspectives. So today, we are going to talk about
sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about bubbles in the tub. Let's talk about making love.
Stop the track. We can't talk about sex without talking about consent first. That's right. So, why are we going to talk about consent? Well, personally, and just a warning, you guys, this is a trigger warning for some, but unfortunately, when I was younger, I was sexually assaulted, and my parents never talked about what I experienced or what happened. Although I've done and continue to do work around my sexual assault, it set the tone for my consent practices once I engaged in intimacy. And it took me years to unlearn and understand boundaries and good consent practices. So hey, why not share what I've learned? Because I know I'm not the only one who struggles with this topic.
Bombastic side eye.
So, yeah. And then also, just another side note, I also unfortunately had an abusive ex who would attack me for my sexual experiences I had prior to meeting them. They also did, of course, other horrible things, and hence why I decided to use UB as an alias for my podcast. And I'm not quite sure if I'm ready to talk about that dynamic yet, just because I am still healing. But I say all of this to say that when I share a personal story from my past, it can be triggering to talk about my relationship with sexuality because of the stigma and judgment associated with it, and the shame and abuse I've received while expressing my sexuality. But it's about time we get over the stigma and the shame and start talking about it more so that we can reduce the stigma and the shame associated with it. So let's get into it. So, what is consent? Well, when you think of consent, think of fries. And I thought, man, that's like such a fitting acronym for me because I fucking love French fries. So I was like, I'll remember this. And hopefully you guys will too. So fries, the F stands for freely given, meaning consenting is a choice you make without pressure, manipulation, or under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Reversible. Anyone can change their mind about what they feel like doing at any time, even if you've done it before, and even if you're both naked in bed. The I stands for informed. You can only consent to something if you have the full story. For example, if someone says they'll use a condom and they don't, there isn't full consent. And then the E stands for enthusiastic. So when it comes to sex, you should only do stuff you want to do, not things that you feel you're expected to do. And then the S stands for specific. So saying yes to one thing, like going to the bedroom to make out, doesn't mean you've said yes to other things like having sex. So I want to expand just a little bit more on some of the acronyms, like R for reversible. So a lot of times when I have conversations with different individuals about their consent practices, I've heard people get confused on this concept. So we're clear, the person can change their mind at any point. You can be literally like freaking 5 centimeters from the entrance, whether that's oral, vaginally, or anally, and that person can say, you know what, never mind, I'm not feeling it. And it is their right, and it's not something you should shame the person for expressing. You should actually acknowledge and just come from a place of understanding, like, okay, yeah, for sure, let me just chill out. But in case you may feel some type of way, I just want to normalize that it's okay to get frustrated when there's a shift in routine or your expectation of what's going to happen. I feel like that is very much a human experience to feel frustrated when you lose access to something that's exciting. What's not acceptable is to guilt trip that person for changing their minds or treating them badly because of it. Just run that back just so it's clear. What's not acceptable is for you to guilt trip that person for changing their mind or treat them badly because of it. So if you get dysregulated just with any other thing in your life, because we're humans, just take a moment, take a few breaths, try to regulate yourself, and then go somewhere with that. You know, maybe it's some sexual frustration pent up and you're ready to go, and maybe you still need to get a release. So go ahead and, you know, you can remove yourself from that environment and then provide yourself with release. You can also take a step back and be like, hey, I heard you, I respect that, and I hear that you don't want to have I don't know, oral sex right now. Is it okay if we do light touching? You know, check back in with that person, see what maybe they are comfortable with. But treating them bad is just not, it's not it, boo.
Stop it. Get some help.
That's not it. So also, if it does trigger a frustrated response, it sounds like you hold a lot of privilege, which is something we all hold, just so you know, at certain points and certain times. But if you feel frustrated by someone expressing that they're not comfortable doing something and they're not going to grant you access to their body, then yeah, that to me, that shows that there's a lot of privilege and you're used to having immediate access to things, and you're not used to people telling you no. Therefore, I think that's something that should be worked through, and worked through those emotions better, because that's gonna help in multiple and various spaces and places and different relationships. You're gonna better engage with people when, you know, you are able to remove that expectation of you owe me something. Move to appreciation instead of expectation. And I actually got that off of a bookmark. So, and I was like, damn, you're right. That's a good thing to practice. Another thing I wanted to expand on is the S, which is specific. So saying yes to one thing doesn't mean you're saying yes to everything else. So the best way to be sure that, you know, this is actually happening and you're practicing good consent, is to check back in with your partner and be like, hey, can I take this off? Can I touch you here? Because that shit could be a turn on, okay? Like, it doesn't ruin the mood. And to me, just to clarify what can ruin the mood is when you set an expectation for that person to perform a certain way sexually without checking in with them first. I think that can ruin the mood for sure. And just in case, you know, you want to hear more about fries and consent practices, I'm gonna stitch in a video here that further elaborates on this concept.
How do you know for sure if someone wants to have sex with you? Well, actually, there's only one way. They need to tell you. You need to have consent. But what does consent really mean? Consent means both parties are really, truly into what's going on. This means that nobody's being guilted or pressured into doing anything. Silence does not equal consent. Some people think it's not rape unless there's fighting, screaming, or someone yelling no. But that's not true. Communication doesn't always happen with words. Body language can say a lot if you pay attention. Are they leaning in or are they pulling away? Do they look happy or do they look uncomfortable? Are they kissing you back or are they just staying kind of still? You have to pay attention to all the signals. This includes body language and words. No one can read minds, so it's always good to talk about it. Asking for consent doesn't have to be awkward. Asking for consent can actually be kind of sexy.
Want to show me your bedroom?
Show me where you want me to touch you.
Do you want to help me take these clothes off?
So, let's break this consent thing way down. 1, everyone's clear about what's about to happen next, and they're happy about it. If you're making out with someone for the first time and you want to go further, check in first.
Can I take your shirt off?
Want to try something different?
2, everyone in the situation has to feel free to be able to say no without being pressured or hassled. It's not cool to pressure people into doing stuff they're obviously uncomfortable with, or make them feel bad for saying no or wanting to stop things. Being pushy or manipulative makes for some pretty bad sex. And obviously, if a person is drunk, high, passed out, or asleep, it's not okay to do sexual stuff with them. They can't consent when wasted or unconscious. So doing this is actually rape. 3, be honest about whether or not you're on birth control, have an STD, or having sex with other people. Wouldn't you want to know that? If you're going to get naked with someone, you have to have trust and honesty. 4, saying yes to sex once doesn't mean you're saying yes to it forever. It may be tough to pause in the middle of some super sweet action, but your partner has the right to stop at any time. And 5, sex is all about connections and pleasure, right? If everyone feels respected, sex will be much better for both of you. We all deserve a safe, pleasurable, and awesome sex life. The more respect you show to the other person, the more they'll trust you enough to relax and enjoy. And the more honest you are about what you want and don't want, the better things will go. It's easy to talk about what consent means, but what does it look like in real life? How are we supposed to know for sure how far someone wants to go or if they want to get intimate at all? Check out our other videos for tips on how to do this consent thing right.
Okay, representation. I mean, yeah, I was super pumped to find this video and see that it's a Black man talking about better consent practices. He's like the lead in this video, and that there are different sexualities presented in the video. Because yeah, not everything is all about heterosexuality. Representation matters. So good job, Planned Parenthood marketing. All right, so there are some things I want to expand on based off of what he said in the video. Thought it was beautifully articulated, but
Let's get into it a little bit more, shall we?
So body language. Something that was mentioned. It doesn't take much to read someone's body language. We legit do this in so many social interactions to gauge safety amongst like other things. So you just have to care and be observant of how the other person is presenting. And I think the video did a really good job of providing an example of what that would look like. You know, are they going to be like super tense? Like, are they avoiding eye contact? Like, if they're closed off body language, it's not usually a sign that they're good to go. So yeah. Another point I want to expand on is you can say no and shouldn't guilt trip someone. Sad, but I'm gonna elaborate on this a little bit more with a personal story. Again, remember that this is pretty triggering to talk about at times, but I think it's important to have these conversations and normalize some of the shit that we experience as just human beings. So I am going to just throw myself out there completely. So yeah, so keep in mind I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my shit. Okay, this is personal, but hey, it happens, we're human. So story time. In the past, I was hanging out with this guy and I was geeked because I thought he was so cute. He just had green eyes. There really wasn't anything special. And have you ever just like looked back at someone that you've like were interested in and was like,
girl, why?
Yeah, that was him. I've looked back and I was like, but at the time I was geeked. And he asked me to come over and watch movies. And just so you know, I lived a sheltered life and had no idea that this was like another way of saying I had no idea that that was another way of saying I wanna fuck. I was naive and a virgin at the time, so give your girl a break. So with my naive ass, I went over there with a friend because, you know, safety in numbers. And we went into his room. I think we were playing video games. And then out of nowhere, he was like kissing me. And we started kissing and making out. And I remember thinking like, damn, this is random. And I wasn't really into it. And I finally found the courage to tell him I'm not down to have sex. And this fool kicks me out of his apartment. Yeah. So not cool at all for making someone feel bad for expressing their comfortability in engaging sexually with you. Don't be that person, okay? Yeah. And another thing I want to clarify, in the video it says asking for consent. You know, it doesn't matter how many times you've hooked up with someone. You can make out with the same person a jillion times and you should still check in and see if they would like to move further. So it doesn't matter the dynamic, just check in. Yeah, and another great point that was brought up in the video is that everyone should be clear about what's going to happen next. And this shouldn't just apply to the sexual act. Like, it shouldn't just apply to like touching and oral and anal and vaginal, and yeah, it shouldn't just apply to that. So Yay, another story time. And this tells you, like, yeah, your girl's experienced some shit. So this person that I was with while I was intimate with them, well, prior to being intimate with them, they asked me for consent. And I think this is the first time I've ever been asked. And I hesitantly said yes. And he picked up on that. And he was like,
Are you sure?
and I wasn't sure at all. But I felt pressured, and not because of what he was doing or saying, but because I don't think I was into it as much as I thought I was. But again, I had poor consent practices. So I said another hesitant yes. And then he said, yeah, I just got to make sure because, you know, and then he starts to explain how like rape allegations start. And again, horrible consent practices back in the day and horrible boundary practices. So I did not know that, you know, looking back at that, I'm like, that's a big red flag. Yeah. So I did consent to sex. And then I wasn't clear on what was going to happen next, though. So he called me a bitch repeatedly.
Oh, you motherfuckers. Okay.
And I definitely didn't consent to that. And honey, when I tell you I was traumatized, it took me a while to process what happened. And during the act, I went into freeze mode and I never talked to that individual again. I was distraught, honestly. I was so upset about the interaction. And after therapy, and not just for the situation was the reason why I went to therapy, but after therapy, I realized that consent is also asking if you can go off script. So we consented to sex, but if you're gonna, you know, wanna get a little more kinky, I should say, see if that person's into it. So it brings me to my next point. How can we as individuals have better consent practices? Well, I believe that we should take the time to talk about what you want to do with that person and ask them what they would like to do. And ladies, this goes for you too. Ladies who are in heterosexual relationships and are pursuing men, I definitely have picked up on people who will just go for it. And maybe just like inappropriately grab guys. Like, that's not good consent practices. It goes both ways, doesn't matter your gender. So yeah, talk to that person, ask them what they would like to do, tell them what you want to do. And you don't necessarily have to have it all figured out before you engage in that act. If you're gonna go off script, just check in with that person and ask if they're okay. Ask if they're okay with it. AKA, come here, closer. Don't be like that asshole from my past. Talk about it, baby. Talk about it. That's how we're really gonna know, because like the video said, we're not mind readers. So the video also mentioned engaging in sex for connection, and I loved that he said that. Whoever wrote this, I was like, yeah, that's true. So if we're engaging in sex for connection, this means you need to be honest with yourself as to why you want to engage with this person sexually. And ask yourself if you have expectations as to how sex should go. AKA, what are your intentions? If you have an expectation of how this person should perform, you're most likely basing your past sexual experiences on this other person, which is extremely, which could be, I should say, extremely damaging to the sexual interaction you can build with that person, that organic sexual chemistry you can have with one another. Yeah, don't just assume. And if the intention is connection, there should be a lot of nonverbal and verbal communication as to what feels good for that person. Do you like when I touch you there? Do you like when I do this? How about this? Too fast, too slow? Come on, man, that shit is hot. That shit is hot. And yeah, because, you know, the reason why we communicate and we don't, you know, want to place any expectations on this person is because each of us is different. And even if you had sex with the same person for years, they're allowed to change their idea of pleasure. We're evolving people, we tend to change, right? So continue to check in, ideally before that. But if something doesn't feel right after the act, then bring it to that person's attention. You guys should be able to talk about it. And I agree with the video. Sex feels better when everyone feels respected. We all deserve a safe, pleasurable, and awesome sex life. And the more practice with building safety, connection, and trust, including one-night stands, the more relaxed the person becomes, which creates a better sexual experience. And I'd be happy to expand more as to how I feel people can practice better connection and safety and trust with one-night stands, because I think that is very much attainable. But we're gonna have to save that for a different video, y'all. And maybe you can comment and interact with your girl and let me know if that's something you want to talk about. But if you remember nothing from the stuff I said, remember, you can always Google FRIES, F-R-I-E-S, consent practices. And remember, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. Thank you guys for joining us here on the California Avenue podcast. I'm your host, UB. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We drop episodes every Friday at 1 p.m. So please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that bell notification to stay updated on all future episodes. Until next time.
Pretty reggae.